Thank you very
Go
much.
ahead.
Steve,
Here's
thank
your
you.
intro.
Thank you. And listen, thank you everyone. I really do appreciate you asking me back. Um, Today I'm going to be talking about the project setup. All right? And it's really about communication. I kind of joke about this. Do you remember when you were courting someone, your spouse, you had a good relationship, and the communication was really good, right? Everyone kind of remember, been in a situation like that? You ever been in a situation where all of a sudden the communication is silent? And you kind of know what that situation is like as well, right? So the reason why we put this program together, the project setup, is because we've had clients over the years say, you know, a project comes into the office, it kind of goes over the wall, and the reality is the project managers and the staff architects or designers really don't know what the project is about, where it came from, and so there's much less buy-in from the perspective of truly understanding what the project is about, and at the same time, as the project goes down the road, changes happen because people don't really understand what the project is about or have a collective understanding of where the project is supposed to be going. Now, I don't recall if you guys use a work plan. Do you guys use a work plan? Kind of informally, maybe?
More important.
Okay, and most firms are like that as well. But what this is supposed to do is it's supposed to create dialogue. It's supposed to create conversation. It's supposed to create a collective understanding of what the project is about, why someone hired you. It's about meeting their expectations. And hopefully what that's going to do is it's going to create less redesign. It's going to make your projects more profitable. And hopefully the projects will end up being more successful as well. So, and let me just say this, as we go along, by all means, feel free to speak out, ask questions, comments, because the other thing is, what I seem to learn more and more is that, you know, you might learn something from me, but I hope to be learning something from you as well. And so if there's anything in here that you think that we should be talking about, by all means, please let me know. Okay, so here we go. So these are going to be the learning objectives. We're going to understand the responsibilities of the prime consultant in the construction process. Most of you obviously are aware of what that is, but we'll go over it quickly. We're going to talk about the project setup, improving internal and external communication. We're going to discuss the concept of vicarious liability and dealing with your sub-consultants and how to deal with communication issues with their sub-consultants. Who here has ever had a communication problem with a sub-consultant? Right? Who here has ever had a communication problem with a client? All the time, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about integrating communication as a protocol to improve clarity and to minimize risk. The greater clarity everyone has on the project, in terms of where the project is going, the more confidence you're going to have in terms of providing the services. So, you've obviously seen this before. This is known as traditional project delivery. Okay? And what happens is, at the beginning of the project, it's always the owner that says, okay, I have a site, I have a plan, I want to do something. The owner turns to a design firm or a design team and they say, we want you to design something. Okay, and at the end of the day, once it's designed, it goes to CDs, it goes to bidding, and then ultimately there's going to be a contractor. It could be a developer who's also going to act as their own builder, or there might be a separate contractor as well. But what we're going to do today is we're going to be focusing on the left side, the communication component of the types of conversations that you should be having internally and externally in order to keep things moving in the right direction. So here we go. Now everyone has a handout. Okay, for some reason the printer did not, actually it did not format it exactly the same way, but the content is without question here, okay? So this is what, well, let me ask you a question. When a project comes in to your office, what happens? Is there a project kickoff? What is the process that your firm goes through in terms of starting up a project? Is it what?
There's an opportunity number associated with it, so everybody knows it exists.
Okay, so a number comes in, or a number's created. That's really good. Okay, and then there's the meeting, I imagine, with a principal, project manager, and designers, right? Is that correct? Some, okay, I see
Come
some
on,
chuckles.
Participate.
It's okay to say yes, it's okay to say no.
I'm not gonna answer these things, you guys answer.
But let me say this, what we're gonna do today is this provides a roadmap for that initial conversation. Does anyone ever, maybe I don't wanna see a show of hands, has everyone ever felt that like a project comes in and it kinda comes over the fence? And it's like, you don't really know what the project's about, kind of what the dynamics of the project is, or dynamics are? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through this.
Time-honored ritual known as dumping.
I understand. And let me tell you, most firms dump. In good times and in bad. And in good times, when you guys are busier, you're so busy, who's got the time to sit down for an hour? But what this will do is this will alleviate hours of aggravation. So this is the, now I'm talking in a vacuum, this is the ideal situation. We have the principal who got the project, we have a project manager, and then we have several designers, staff architects, or other people that have been working on the project. And what's going to happen is the project manager will be in charge of this, and will start collecting the information, and the information primarily is going to be coming from the principal. So I'm just going to point to Steve. I'm assuming that's your project that comes in, okay? And so the project's going to have a name. Okay, well, the name of this project is, and the project number is Y, okay? And here's today's date. That's the easy part. But here's the interesting thing, okay? There should be a conversation about what the purpose of the project is. Well, the purpose of the project is to create a living space for 150 residents that is sustainable, that has an impact on the community, and so forth and so on. But it's good to really know what is the purpose of the project, not just what is the project. Okay, well, the project is 200,000 square feet. That's great. But what is the purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay? The description of the project. Well, the project is 200,000 square feet. It's going to be, we believe, 6 stories tall, and blah, 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 blah. The construction value is going to be $40 million, and so forth and so on. And if there's an RFP, you probably want to attach the RFP, right? Because the project manager is basically the person that is in charge of the project, that runs the project, the person that technically would put together the resources, the people that are going to be working on it. Here's something else you want to talk about. What is the owner's success criteria on the project? This is actually kind of an important thing, and let me give you an example. Who here has ever had a client where you felt that you've never quite met the owner's expectation? Anyone? Okay. And let me tell you something. Who here's ever had a bad client? Right. Okay? Now, I don't know if I said this in the past, but I would say every 18 months we fire a client. And we fire a client because I feel that our firm can never meet their expectation. All right? And so no matter how hard we work, and we'll typically end up spending way more money than we get from them in terms of revenue, but no matter how hard we work, we find that we can never meet their expectation. Now, everyone knows what it's like to have a good client, right? And sometimes it's like chemistry, trust, confidence, and chemistry, where you just feel that everyone's on the same page between you guys and the owner, and things always seem to go smoothly. But if you have a bad client, okay, their expectation might always be changing. Whatever you do, you may never meet their expectation. So the owner's success criteria might be, well, gee, we want to make a lot of money on this project. We want to be in and out. Okay, most owners want to be in and out, right? But what is the owner's success criteria? Okay, another question you may want to ask, and this is a really good one, which is not here. Wait for it. Why did you hire us? Okay, if you ask your client, why did you hire us, they will tell you exactly what their expectation is. We hired you because your documents are really clear. We hired you because you guys are quick and accurate. We hired you because maybe you were a little less expensive than other people. But it's important to know what the owner's expectation is. Because if you know what the expectation is, you're always able to meet their expectation, or at least exceed it just by a little. I always say that if you don't have a target, you're going to miss every time. If you don't have a target, you're going to miss every time. So asking, what's your success criteria? Why did you hire us? They are going to tell you exactly what their expectation is. So if their expectation is speed, and they're really concerned about speed, then that's what you need to meet. They're less concerned about some other issues as well, but they're mostly concerned about speed. They might be concerned about budget. They might be concerned about the quality construction. They might be concerned about zoning. All right? Have you guys ever been hired because you were able to get things through the zoning boards more easily or more quickly than others? Right? But if you know why they hired you, because if they hired you for zoning, and let's assume for some reason the process slows down, at least it's easier to address that and say, I understand you hired us because of this. These are the issues that we're anticipating, and so forth and so on. Any comments on that? Let me ask you a question. Do you feel that you have some of these conversations every once in a while, internally? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Good, good. Because if you know exactly what the expectations are moving forward, it's going to be a lot easier to manage that. Initial risks. It's always good to have, I know I sell insurance, it's always good to have a conversation about risks, okay? A risk could be, well, we have a bad contract. You should have a conversation about that. A risk could be, you want something, the owner is always really demanding. A risk could be the owner always wants us to do all the documents and all the work, and we may not get paid until the end. It's worth having a conversation about that. People should know about that. A risk could be, well, there might be this nonprofit organization that doesn't want us to be involved and doesn't want this project here. Can anyone tell me some other risks? What do you think? What do you think? A risk could be, well, we don't know who the contractor is, right? Or we could say, well, we know who the contractor is, and we know that the contractor is a lousy contractor. Or the flip side is, we know who the contractor is going to be, and we know that they're a really good contractor. That's not really a risk, that's actually a good thing, right? So having those kinds of conversations internally, once again, because it's about creating a sense of expectation. Because if you put these out and lay these out here, everyone's going to have the same sense of anticipation, rather, in terms of what potentially could happen. A risk could be, well, you know what? New York is highly litigious. The project is in the city of New York. Actually, New Jersey is extremely litigious, believe it or not. New Jersey, Texas, and California are the three most litigious states. New Jersey, Florida, Texas, California. So not necessarily New York, believe it or not. Okay. Any questions or comments? No? Okay. We'll go on. So then we go on. All right, we talk about, okay, well, who's the principal in charge? Right? Who's the project manager? Who's the designer or designers, technical staff, so forth and so on? Did they attend the meeting? Did they not attend the meeting? So it's important to know who attends, especially if the project manager is not there, then it may not be worthwhile having that meeting, or at least that initial meeting, because they are really going to be the stewards of the project. And then you have other responsibilities, client coordination. Who's going to be attending the meeting? Who's going to be the primary designer? Design review, graphics production, CAD, so forth and so on. Who's going to be the spec writer? Do you guys do the spec writing internally?
Yeah.
Really? Who does that? Is it split amongst everyone?
Everybody.
Really, really?
Occasionally one, source of.
Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. 'Cause you have to be special to be a spec writer. It's tough to do that all the time. But anyway, so the point is, but who's going to be doing that? Who's responsible? Like, for example, okay, anyone here remember Michael Jordan? I might be outdating myself. He was a basketball player, right? And what Michael Jordan always used to say was something like, if there's 2 seconds left in the game, I want the ball. Okay? So the reality is, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to establish a sense of who's going to be responsible for what and when. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So that way we're not duplicating effort. It's a sense of accountability, it's a sense of understanding where the project is and where it's going, but it's also a sense of who's going to be doing what, that way we don't duplicate effort. Okay? Has the project manager received a copy of the scope of the contract for services? Okay? Hopefully the project manager is reading or has read. Yes?
Project manager should have participated in meetings.
Say it again. The project manager?
Project manager should be participating in developing this.
I would agree with you. The
Should be
project,
something that's handed off.
I would agree. The project manager should be involved with developing the scope, developing the proposal, developing the fee. Because here's another thing, because as we get down here, let me say this. It's one thing to say, okay, we have a large project, the fee's going to be $1 million. In fact, I'm going to give you an example. About 8 years ago, a client of ours got this very large project. They're architects, and it was 2 office buildings and retail space. It was on Long Island. Okay? Anyone ever been out to Long Island? Yeah? Okay. I was just out there yesterday. I'm not a big fan. But anyway, so the point is this, okay? So they had this huge project out on Long Island, and the fee was something like $2 million, but it was something like 500,000 square feet of office retail. And the reality was the fee wasn't remotely close to what they could actually produce the documents for. So when they went to the project manager and said, okay, we have a $2 million fee and we're going to be doing this, the project manager was really floored. Because how could that project manager possibly design a project and get it built within a $2 million budget? You see what I'm saying? So having involvement in terms of crafting proposals, the budget in particular, is actually really important. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is, okay, the project manager looking at the scope and the services, the project manager looking at the budget. Because ultimately, if the budget isn't sufficient enough to do the project, there needs to be a conversation up front. Because that means that either you're going to be using a ton of standard details, and hopefully you are using standard details, but also there needs to be a lot of workarounds in order to meet that budget. Because if you lose money on pretty much 1 project or 2 projects or 3 projects, you really can't make that up on volume. Right? Because ideally, each project is to come in very close to budget. That's the ideal scenario. We've seen some firms where if they do 30 projects in a year, sizable projects, 3 of them lose money. The other 27 are on budget. But the problem is those 3, they lose so much money that it's really, really ugly. Okay? So you have to be really careful. Look at the budgets. Hopefully you are looking at budgets on an ongoing basis, the project managers, to make sure that you're staying on budget. That's really important. Most of the time, what should happen, and what we see typically, is that most firms will meet the budget during design, right? Or they'll make even money, they'll be under budget during design, and then they end up losing money during construction. That's typically what we see. Right? So it's really important to at least make sure that you're making money, or at least you're definitely on budget during design, because when you get to CA and you have a bad contractor, you can end up losing a lot of money. Okay? So what are the likely? So have you discussed the scope? Have you discussed key issues? You've discussed the budget, right? What are the likely pitfalls to watch out for? What are firm image? What's the firm image that you're looking for? Do you ever have conversations about that? Yeah? And what kind of things do you talk about? Do you talk about that like in each project or just some projects? It's okay to speak. Remember, I sell stuff for a living. I can just talk and talk and talk. Now, if you talk about firm image, like, what is the firm image? Like, typically, what are you guys looking to project on your projects? You looking to project a boxwood molding? Or are you looking to project something that has greater sensitivity? And do you talk about that? Like, what kind of conversations do you have?
I think our conversations are more about service.
Okay. Okay. So, so the conversations are, the internal conversation is more about service, in terms of like the kinds of service and the level of service that you're going to provide to the client, okay? And you talk about like possible pitfalls, such as like a quirky attitude that an owner might have, or one of the project managers on the project. You talk about that kind of stuff. What other kinds of conversation? What other types of things? Beside the image, because this question, it's really not about what is the project going to look like. The question is about what kind of image is the firm looking to portray in terms of getting the next project. See what I'm saying? It's more about marketing, in fact. One of our clients up in New York, West Nyack, New York, his name is Malcolm McLaren, MG McLaren. I don't know if you know him. He's a structural engineer, okay? They have like 4 or 5 offices. And I taught him something and he taught me something. What I taught him was that I said to him, make sure that when your people start the project, they always start the project with the end in mind, right? When you start the project, you always need to start the project with the end in mind. In other words, there needs to be a sense of clarity about where the project is going, and that's what this does. But what he said to me, which I thought was also interesting, was that, yes, this project is very important. It's very important, but don't just think about this project, think about your next project. In other words, think about where your next project is coming from. Because everyone here is in the marketing business. Everyone here is in the selling business. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't use the word sales. We use the word business development. Everyone here is in the business development business. Don't necessarily think about the project you're working on now. I also want you to think about the project you're working on in the future. And here's something else you should be aware of, okay? Show of hands, who here is project managers? Okay, about a half a dozen or so. Excellent. Okay, who here are staff designers or staff architects? Excellent. Okay, so I want you to think about this. Project managers, right? The people that you deal with, someday, a whole host of them are going to become, they're going to become leaders in their organization. They will become decision makers. I want you to think about that. The people that you deal with across the table from you at the owner's side, at some point in time, a bunch of them will become decision makers. A bunch of them will become your clients. Same thing with the staff architects or designers. The people sitting across the table from you at the owner, they are going to rise, and you're going to rise with them to project managers. And someday, a bunch of them are going to rise to owners to become decision makers. So ultimately, eventually your firm will be talking about leadership transition, and we have to think about, okay, where's the business going to come from? I want you to think about who your client is. The person sitting across the table from you. Think about also the fact that someday they will be making decisions. Think about where that next project is coming from. Okay, that's really important. That's how we keep the firm growing and moving forward, by taking advantage of those things. Most firms don't think necessarily of the firm image. There are only a couple of people that think of the firm image. But I want you to think about this. Your staff architects, you're going to become project managers. Project managers are going to become principals. So think about the image. Think about where you want to go, what you want to portray in the marketplace. How's the project manager prepared to review the design budget outline? Have you looked at the budget? Do project managers typically look at budgets, or is it just kind of something that's there? Or is it something kind of elusive? Do you analyze them? Do you look at them? Do you figure it out? You break them down? Good. That's really good. Okay, those are the types of things that are really important. Because if you see something wrong up front, you have to say something. Better to know that you're going to lose money today before you start the project, as opposed to after the project. Because there's probably a lot of things you can do today in order to offset the challenges that you're going to face in the future. Okay? And that's why it's important to have a conversation. Any comments? Anyone disagree with me? Is anyone tired of listening to me? Not yet. Maybe. Okay.
Not a very active group today.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, come on, who's excited? Okay.
Steve's excited.
I am excited. Okay. So,
Steve, how often should a project manager be, in your experience, looking at the budget and analyzing?
excellent question. Ideally, every 2 weeks.
See, that's the way it's done, folks. You ask a question, he gives a response.
I love when you ask questions. Questions are good. Questions are good because that way it's not a lecture, you know, that way it's more of a conversation. The ideal scenario, okay, The ideal scenario is you're looking at a budget once a week. That's not practical. What's practical is every other week. You should be looking at the budget, you should be looking at percentage complete. Because if you look at it every 2 weeks and you recognize that you're really going to be out of budget, or you recognize that something's coming along, it's possible that you can, at that point in time, develop a workaround. And you sit down with everyone, you say, okay, how are we going to do this because we're running into an issue with this or that? But here's the other thing that I've learned from a couple of my clients. One of my clients on the consulting side, they're actually out of Toronto. Okay? Yes, we're international. Can you imagine? But anyway, so and what she was saying was that they look at budgets every 2 weeks. Okay? And when they're out of budget, there's always a reason why they're out of budget. That's her feeling. Okay? And so it could be because there were some additional services that were provided that created the overage. See what I'm saying? It could be because maybe someone wasn't designing something properly. It could have been like an internal communication. Okay, we want the project to go in this direction. Then all of a sudden you realize, uh-oh, the project really needs to go in that direction. That's nenever happened, right? Of course not. Of course, all right? Now, but what's interesting is, and she's been doing this for, I would say about 10 years at this point. And what she said was that most of the time they're out of budget because they're providing additional services or the scope changed or increased beyond what was originally agreed to. Okay? And so the thing is, if you only look at a budget every 6 weeks, it's probably too late. Because depending upon the size of the project, you could actually be burning through a lot of money. Do you remember like when the internet phase? Remember when the internet and all these companies were coming on board, and they were talking about the burn rate? Does anyone not hear that phrase? Okay, let me tell you what the burn rate is. The burn rate is how much money they spend a week, a month, a year. It's not a year. It's probably a month, a week, a day. Okay? So on every project, you have a staff, you have a team, okay? You might have 4 people, you might have 6 people, depending upon the size of the project, right? Well, when you allocate those people to a particular project, the overhead, the salaries and the billing on those people creates, in essence, a burn rate. Okay, so the burn rate on a project could be $1,000 a day. In other words, that's how much money your firm is spending or investing in those people to create work. So at the end of 2 weeks, if the burn rate was a total of $10,000 and you only had $8,000 in the budget, that's a problem. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I think every other week is appropriate. But I would say this: it shouldn't be every other week you kind of look at it and say, okay? It should be every other week you actually sit down for an hour with a principal and you actually go over the budget and you talk about what's coming up, you talk about what the potential issues are if you're at budget, under budget, over budget. Okay, those are really important things because, you know, it's like anything else. Who here likes going on vacation? Who here likes getting raises, right? Who here likes, you know, whatever? Who here likes employment?
Nobody raised their hand.
I love employment. Yahoo! Okay, but the point is, you know, every other week I think is practical and it's important. Because if you get that one bad project, just like this other client, you know, they had 3 bad projects in a year and they had a total of 30 decent-sized projects. Those 3 basically took away all profit for the year. And that can happen, and it happens all the time. Any other questions? Yes,
It
over
kind of
here.
goes back a little bit to what
Sure.
you were talking about before, but it's like, how do you rectify that? Because when you go back and you talk about firm image and things like that, and one of the basis you mentioned was budget, or how much you were going to charge for a particular job. Okay?
Right.
So it kind of factors into the whole image thing, like whether or not a client chose you because you're a little cheaper than somebody else.
Mhm.
How do you reconcile all of these factors when you're talking about burning through budget? You know, at some point you kind of have to make the cutoff where you say, okay, we can't charge that little bit less than everybody else now, but in order to think about the next project or the next
Excellent,
project?
excellent.
You know, how do you reconcile all of those?
I love when someone asks a question and I know the answer to. Okay, so this is actually what you do, and I don't know if I mentioned this before. Project managers should be keeping something called a change log internally. I don't know if I mentioned this. And if you don't have one, I can get you a copy of it. But basically, it's an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, and the project manager is going to keep this change log internally. And what's going to happen is, for every change, okay, you're also going to have like an internal, like little proposal. Because it's not just, okay, how much time is this change going to take us, but how much time, I'm saying as the architectural group, how much time will it take the MEP group, how much time will it take the structural group, okay? And I'm just going to use those three disciplines, okay, as an example, okay? Now, what you may find is that it may only take an hour or 2 hours total. If that's the case, that's no big deal, in my opinion, because I don't think I would ever want to nickel and dime a client, never. And I'm sure you don't want to do that either. But the project manager should keep this change log and should be logging, you know, we had this little change, took an hour. This little change took 3 hours. This little change took 10 hours. Uh-oh. This little change took whatever, okay? And what's going to happen is you're going to keep this log. And at some point in time, it's kind of like the straw on the camel's back. And so this is typically what we would suggest. You kind of use this line. You say, well, ultimately, you go to the owner and say, look, we've put in an extra 100 hours. Because on projects your size, you probably put in a lot of time, not just you, but your subs as well, right? You, the MEP, another MEP is internal. And you can, and so the owner may come up with another change. And you really look at this thing and say, well, the change is going to be another 15 hours. So you may want to say to the owner something along these lines. I said, you know, you show the owner, so we've had all these changes, we haven't charged anything, we'll take care of this next change at our expense. And then you remain silent. Okay, and I'm gonna tell you why I say exactly that. We're gonna take care of this next change at our expense. Now what am I inferring when I say at our expense? This change at our expense. What am I inferring? Yes?
From then on,
It's theirs. Exactly.
And you should probably keep track of which changes are caused by our issues that we didn't resolve and which are caused by unexpected outside things.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And by separating the two, you know, well, gee, is it an internal issue? You know, is it communication issue? Do we not know where the project was going? Whatever. Those should not be on the clients whatsoever. But I mean, we've had. Oh, I'll go back to that in 2 seconds. Okay, so the next change is on you, at your expense. And the reason why I use the word expense is because, you know, owners think that change is free. Does anyone feel that way or no?
Yeah.
They think there's no cost. It's free. Oh my God, it's a little change. Well, guess what? If they're going to change in CDs, oh my God, it's a lot of effort, right? So there's a cost. So,
No, it's not.
well, not for your client, but for you guys, it is.
This is the easy button.
No. I have an easy button in my office. Let me tell you, I like to hit it, but nothing is easy. You know, everything happens behind the scenes because, in essence, you really don't want your client to see the backstage. In other words, all the cogs turning and all this kind of stuff. They don't want to see that, right? But the reality is, by using the word expense, we'll take care of this change at our expense. You are telling your client that there is a cost associated with making those changes. And you've also shown your client that all these changes, there has been an expense or cost associated with it. They may not see it, but the next one's going to be theirs. Okay? I wanted to go back to a point you made, and I don't know if I could remember my train of thought, but just give me 2 seconds. You were talking about how it should be separated between internal issues and external. That's right. You know, there are a number of consulting firms out in the AE world. Okay, you have PSMJ's Wide White, you have the Cox Group, you have Peter Piven, who's here, and I remember reading a statistic a number of years ago. I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, and basically I think it was PSMJ, and what they said was that on every project, the consulting firm would expect 8 to 10% additional change. Okay? 8 to 10% additional change. Why it's important that the project manager understand what the scope is because I always say there are only 3 things in life you can guarantee: death, taxes, and change in a construction project. There's always going to be change. And so when you have change, you have to decide internally, are we going to charge for it or not charge for it? But when there's change, there's an opportunity to have a conversation about what those costs are with your client. So that's why I would suggest that internal, track the change internally, and then if you get to a point where things are getting really out of hand, you want to say something. We had a client a number of years ago. They do subsidized housing, and they're out of New York City. And I remember the owner was telling me that, and they do like 200 unit projects, subsidized housing. And the owner, or the developer, excuse me, was calling one of the staff designers saying, oh, I want you to make some renderings. I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And so for 3 months, maybe half of this person's time was spent doing these things for the owner. The principal never knew about it. And so after 3 months, finally the principal found out about it, whatever it was, and there was a very difficult conversation because that was not part of the scope. The developer was not paying for those services and clearly fell outside. So, it's important to understand what the scope is, but it's also important to track change as well. Okay, was there a question or comment?
Get back to what the PM's responsibilities are. We talked about scope of work, what's entailed in that scope with that client. How is that conveyed, that work that needs to be done by us to our staff? I mean, you get buy into the budget, but you also have associated man hours for each of those tasks to get that job done. And is it best to have that staff buy into it early on so they have some expectations of what it's going to take to get from point A to B?
Yeah,
And that's a big...
absolutely. And part of the conversation revolving around this document is having that conversation. Okay, what's the budget? Who's going to be involved? Okay, how much time are we expecting for each task, and so forth and so on. Like, how narrowly does your firm define like man hours? You say, okay, I'm gonna put you on this project. Steve, you're gonna put me on this project for 15 hours, and then 15 hours here, or is it in the beginning of the week? I'm assuming someone allocates people and time. Is that the way your firm? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So really, the ideal scenario is at this internal kickoff meeting, talking about who are going to be the designers, who's the project manager, how much time they would have within certain tasks. That's why I asked originally if you guys use a work plan, because what a work plan does is that it breaks down who's going to do what and how many hours are allocated to certain parts of the project. And then each week, usually someone is going to say in the firm, okay, we're going to put this person on this project for X amount of hours and so forth and so on. And so they're going to manage who's doing what. That's typically what is done. But usually that conversation should have up front. And as you go through the scope of the project with schematics, we're expecting, X amount of hours, and, for me, X amount of hours for the principal, possibly, X amount of hours for the staff designers. Okay, so does the PM understand the schedule? Does the PM understand their role? It's possible that your role as a project manager could be different from one project to the other, depending upon who the owner is. Who's the main person that will be attending meetings? Does the project manager understand how to keep track of extras? We kind of talked about before. Have all sub-consultants been contacted? Contracts formalized? Okay. We also have a process in here for managing the sub-consultant relationship. I can come back and speak to that at another time if need be, depending on how much time I have. Are the contracts formalized? Ideally, there's always a contract that's signed before you start services between you and the owner, and there's always a contract signed between you and any sub-consultant signed before you start work. Yeah. We hope, ideally, okay? I can tell you all kinds of war stories, but that's the ideal situation, okay? Just think of it this way. There's good, there's bad, and there's really ugly, okay? If you don't have a contract signed, it could be ugly. We want to try to avoid that, all right? Does the PM understand the agency approvals? That's really important, the approval process. Because if you anticipate an issue in terms of what the process is, or how long it's going to take, you need to be very clear with an owner. Okay? That's very important. Who's responsible for taking the lead on approvals? What are the here's a good one. What are the client expectations in terms of communication? I want to see a smile. Come on, everyone smile, all right? Okay, what are the client's expectations regarding communication? All right, now as Debbie knows, I don't like email. Okay, this is me. I'm just going to talk about me for a moment. This is about me, just for a sec. I don't like email. So, I like to use the phone. And I'm going to talk about the phone. So, if you're dealing with an older generation, okay, and let's assume you are 25 years old and your client, the person you're dealing with, is in their 60s or 70s. The younger generation probably loves to use email. The older generation, I'm like an old guy in a younger body here, okay? I hate email. Okay, so if you're dealing with someone, you may want to ask them what's your expectation regarding communication. Also, here's another one. How often would you like to hear from me? Right? Because you probably have some clients that say, I want to have a conversation every Friday afternoon for 1 hour. You may have some clients that say, I want you to email me at the end of every day. You may have some clients that say, I don't want to hear anything, but once a month, reach out to me. Ask those questions. Okay? Ask what your client's expectation is. Also, ask the people sitting across from you. Also, if you're hiring a subconsultant, remember, you're in the driver's seat when you're hiring a subconsultant. You are paying them. So you want to say to them, I would like to hear from you via email once a week, or I want a phone conversation, or whatever it is. Tell them what your expectation is. Okay? Here's another thing dealing with subconsultants. All right? Now, usually, who here is MEP? Show of hands. Excellent. Love you guys. Everyone hates you. You know that, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah,
architects
everybody-
hate you guys, all right?
We hate them.
But the thing is,
Mutual.
but the thing is this, okay? With MEPs, right? Architects in general don't like MEPs, okay? Because of this or that. Now, not internally, because we get rid of a lot of that kind of stuff. But I'm going to talk about externally. Externally, when you're dealing with a subconsult, architect with MEP, they're never happy. So if you're in the driver's seat, if you're hiring a subconsultant, say, I expect this. I expect a coordinated elevation drawing from an MEP. Okay, or I expect X, Y, and Z. This is what I want because it's going to help make my job easier. It's going to help the coordination, whatever it might be. But talk about your expectations to your subs, but also ask your clients' expectations. What's their success criteria? Why did you hire us? How do you want us to communicate to you? Because remember, people don't sue because you make a mistake. They sue because of a lack of relationship. So if you're able to meet their expectation on basically those three planes, those three issues, you're probably like 90% there. 90% there. Okay? Yes?
So I also like mention not only just frequency, but responsive time, responsive.
Oh, yes. I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Because that can vary a lot.
You're absolutely correct. Some owners, some clients, we get an email at the office. We need a certificate of insurance, and then the client will call 10 minutes later, did you get my email? Does that something like that ever happen with you guys? Right. Okay, now, every firm kind of has its own policies, okay? Like what is expected in appropriate level, or response time, okay? Your client might be more sensitive with respect to schedule, response time than others. It's interesting, our office is pretty quick. I mean, we try to be as responsive as possible, right? So with some clients, we try to slow them down a little. If we say, okay, well, it's going to take a week, we'll give it to them in 2 days. They want it, or they may say, well, we need 3 days to review a document or something. But when we return it the same day, they expect it the same day every single time. So there's kind of good and bad. It's both sides of the both sides of the spectrum. But with your client, okay, if it's really someone who's paying your bill, you probably want to ask them, what's your expected response time? It might be the end of the day. Also, like with submittals, for example, like I would imagine, I don't recall, your contracts probably say that you'll review submittals within 10 business days. Okay, it's probably something, or 7 business days, right? No?
10.
Okay. How quickly do you guys respond to submittals? Okay.
You respond.
Two or
Yeah,
three,
We
two.
turn around in two or three.
Okay.
A lot of them go in two.
Okay, but I want you to think about this, okay? Now, generally speaking, I don't like being a drive-up window, right? Which means that I don't want people calling me, I need now, okay? Unless it really is an emergency, and that's fine. So, if your contract says 10, maybe there should be some kind of conversation at some point about, well, you know what? Our contract says 10, but we expect internally our policy will be we'll review the submittals in 5 days. And within 5 days, they go out. Because that way you're creating like a pattern, right? And there's like a cadence behind what you're doing, as opposed to rush, slow down. Rush, slow down. You know what I mean? But consistency with respect to communication might be something you want to ask. Submittals, maybe there's internally want to have that conversation, because if some are doing it in 2 and others are doing it in, I'm going to say, 20, that's not happening.
Depends on the
Yeah.
situations.
And also depends, exactly. So,
There's another issue, and that issue is the contractor, who never makes their submittals on time and want them the next
and
day.
they always want them the next day. Well, that's a big problem. We see it all the time. And on one hand, I prefer to slow the contractors down. All right? Because, of course, now you're going to get the owner screaming. Okay? Who here has ever been driving on the highway and the person behind you is like really annoying? Okay, maybe I only do this. Maybe I'm just the only abrasive one here. And so instead of speeding up, you slow down.
So that was you on the turn.
Steve, it probably was. But you know what I mean? And you want something, it is a huge problem. And I really don't want to give you an answer because, I'm not I'm not in the front line when it comes to that kind of thing. So for up to me, right, I would want to try to slow them down a bit. If they're dumping 10 submittals on your desk or shop drawings, they have to be reviewed in a day, that's completely and utterly unreasonable. Okay? But if it's like they're dumping 10, and you can say, well, I can have one of them to you by tomorrow, which one do you want? And I'll get the others to you within 10 days, because that's what you know what I mean? I don't know, there might be some negotiation. Who here has experience with that? Okay, and how do you handle it? Prioritize.
Ask them.
You ask them to prioritize. Yeah.
But I think there's another way to handle it. We always talk about it up front when we have a kickoff meeting with the contractor.
Yeah.
We want,
Submittal
"Tell us when you're
schedule.
gonna make your submittals, blah, blah, blah." They don't do that, they go back to the owner and they say to the owner, "We're holding them up, we didn't review their submittals." We have a contract with the owner has a contract with the contractor. I think it's our obligation to go back to the owner and tell the owner that the contractor's not performing in accordance with the contract, we can't perform in accordance with our contract.
Okay, well, how about this? All right, I think we did a program talking about like kickoff meetings and stuff like that, and like the submittal forms and how to use strategy there, right? So how about the kickoff meeting? You say to the contractor, "Well, I expect to have the submittal schedule. We're not going to review any submittals until we get it. We're not going to sign the requisition for payment." And they're going to say, "Fine." And then maybe you go back to them and you say, "Well, let me ask you a question. If you're going to dump 10 submittals on my desk and expect me to review them tomorrow, how do you expect me to respond?" In other words, I hate to be confrontational up front because, at first meeting with the contractor, they always say, "Oh, this is the best set of drawings I ever saw," right? They always say that, and then all of a sudden, change order, right? They're always going to say that, and they're always going to give you nice. But if you know that they're going to be, of course they're going to get the submittal schedule. They scream and say, "Well, you know what? Well, here's the problem. This project is without question the most important to me. But if you're going to dump 10 and expect me to return them to you the following day, that's impossible. So if you don't get me the submittal schedule, what's your expectation in terms of responding, and what do you think is appropriate?" And do it right there in front of the owner, because you're right, the contractor is going to go back to the owner and say, "Well, the AEs are holding the thing up, holding it up, and they're going to constantly say that. But once again, we know the contractor is going to dump, or even if they don't dump and they say, well, here are 2, I need them tomorrow, that's going to happen. So you might say, well, you know what? If you say I need them in a day, I'm not going to have them to you in 1 day. I'm going to have them to you in 10 days. I need the submittal schedule. Try it. Let me know if it works.
A lot of times we'll ask for a submittal schedule and we won't get it.
I know, almost all the time.
Several times.
I know. And you'll keep asking, you'll keep asking and asking and asking, and they don't do it. And they don't do it, and then they start saying they're holding it up, blah, 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 blah. It's problematic, but I would at least address the issue and say, you know, you tell me you're going to give it to me, but 80% of the time we never get it. So if we don't get it, and I'm expecting that you're not going to give it to me, or if you give it to me, it's going to be in a format that is just, you know, it's going to be completely out of whack. How are you going to handle this? Because I expect the submittal schedule, and right in front of the owner. And I would go right at him, quite frankly, because you know what ends up happening is you end up spinning your wheels when they dump, and you become that drive-up window, which I don't like. I'm gonna give an example, okay? And I talk about trying to slow a client down. We have a client that's very demanding, who I happen to love and adore, okay? It's not you guys, by the way. Okay? But we have a client, and not the owner principal, okay, but one of the people on staff is always demanding. It's like they get us something and they need it like an hour later. And it was a waiver of lien document, okay? Most people probably don't know what that is, but just work with me. It's just 2 paragraphs, okay? And the attorney we had was out, was not available, and so I was going to come in. I came in yesterday afternoon, and my I call her my air traffic controller in my office. She's like, you know, this is like the 8th time in like 2 weeks. It's been sitting on their desk for I don't know how long. And I said, well, look, I'll review it. It only takes 15 minutes. And she said, you know what? They wanted it yesterday afternoon. I got in the office around 2. We easily could have got to them by 3. But she said, well, you know what? We should slow them down. I'll get it to them first thing in the morning. So even though you might think that's not right, but it's kind of like sometimes you might have clients or contractors that are crying wolf. If you have 10 days, 5 days is really appropriate. 1 day might be a little quick, okay? So, but have that conversation internally first, all right? So in other words, to develop like a policy in terms of what's going on. All right. Subcontracts, do you have subcontract assigned? Does the PM understand the agency approvals? Who's responsible for taking the lead? Client expectations in terms of communication. Okay? Expected milestones. I'm sure this is all kind of in one place, right? Right? Client contacts. Okay. Who is the contact of the client? Who's the secondary contact of the client? Who are the contacts in terms of your subs? Who's the second person in terms of the subs? Okay? And this is for your sub-consultants. All contact information. That way, in case you have to get in touch with someone, it's all in one place, and that in the case one person's not in, you'll be able to find all that information. Are there any firm goals, award-winning practices? Are you looking to achieve or go after some kind of goal, award or recognition for something that you're doing? Okay, and this is accounting. Accounting will love this, I think. When you first start up a meeting, it's important for you, the firm, to know who are the contact people at the accounts payable at your client. Who's going to be paying your bills? What is their contact information? Who are they? What is their payment cycle? We've had clients that have started working on a project, and it takes them like 3 or 4 months to finally track down the right person to actually make sure that the right person getting the bill so the bill can be paid. Okay, I don't know if that ever happens with your firm, but it's important for the accounting group, for Debbie, to understand who the contact people are, because this way the project gets set up from the first day properly, because cash flow is king. Cash flow is really, really, really important. Okay? Are there any questions? Oh, and you're allowed to take notes if you wish. Okay, are there any questions? Any comments?
I'd like to, if you can go back to this, one question you had
Sure.
was the PM understand his role.
Yep.
That's our role.
Yep.
I think that's an issue that we may have,
Okay.
and maybe it needs further discussion.
Okay. Well, let me say this. I think the question is not necessarily how I define what PMs do, because we have a slide. Hold on a second. May I use a little artistic liberty here?
Oh, please do, as long as you don't mind us heckling.
As long as what?
You don't mind us heckling.
Go ahead, heckle. All right, hold on a second. Let me just see if I can find open presentation. The Peter Principle. Here we go. All right, so everyone know what the Peter Principle is? Everyone rises to their own level of incompetence. Okay? There was a guy named Peter, I guess he was the one that came up with that phrase. Each person, no matter who they are, what they do in life, they will rise to the level of incompetence. Okay? In other words, I have a glass ceiling. I'm only going to go so far. And that's where I'm going to settle. Until I get fired. Okay? So when we talk about project managers, the definition of project manager is completely different in every firm. Okay? And so it kind of depends upon the culture of the firm, the people that work at the firm, and so forth and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of start, and what you may find is that some project managers are labeled project managers, but they might only be designers. And it's really the principals that are doing everything themselves. The principals are not only principals, in other words, the principals are managing the relationship with the owner, but they're also doing everything else themselves. They're directing traffic, they're not directing traffic. They're directing the design, that's what they're doing. They're directing design, and they're directing all the communication and the integration with the owner, okay? So the lowest level, I'm gonna say the lowest level of a project manager is when basically principals are their own project managers, okay? And let me say this, I'll go through this, but I think ultimately there needs to be a conversation internally and say, well, where do we want to be? Or here's the other thing, not only where do we want to be, but what do we aspire project managers to be? Because you have different level of experience, there's no question. Okay, so the second level, going up, okay, or principals oversee all projects, but non-principals carry out the work. In other words, they're designing everything, okay? One level up, non-principals run small projects and or supervise assignments on large projects. So in other words, project managers are involved with the small projects, they do all the small projects, but they have some involvement with the larger projects. But primarily, principals are still acting as project managers on the large projects. Okay? Step 4, principals elect project managers to execute certain PM tasks. Okay, and this is, I can track down a piece that we have. I wrote an article, talked about the 7 or 8 financial responsibilities that a project manager should have. This is at the highest level. Okay, maybe we're going to talk about budgets. Everyone loves budgets. Who here loves budgets? Yes. Okay. Okay, so we're talking about budgets, okay? Maybe it's the principal that is the one that's responsible for the budget, time in and time out, and sits down with the project manager to go over the budget. And really, the principal controls the budget. But the project manager controls the workforce, who's doing the work and how it's being done and so forth and so on. You see what I'm saying? And so some of these tasks still may primarily fall under the owners or the principals, and only a couple of them fall under the project managers. And you can kind of decide which ones would be where. Okay, because of the 7, the highest level is when the project manager is providing all 7. And that is they're preparing the proposals. They're in charge of the budget. They're managing the people working on the project. They're in charge of accounts receivables. Those are 5, and I can't remember the other 2. Just work with me, okay? I can get you the article, okay? But the point is this, you know, The question is, to what level do the people that are project managers rise on this ladder? And also, potentially, what level is the expectation that the firm would have in terms of what the project managers will ultimately be doing? So in this situation, you have a project manager who's probably only responsible for one or two of those financial responsibilities, okay, and some other responsibilities as well. Principals entrust all PM responsibilities to project managers. In other words, in this situation, principals say, Mr. Project, what is your name? Milton? Okay, Milton, you're in charge of all project manager responsibilities, including all the financial responsibilities. Me as principal, my role are three. Number one, I manage the relationship with the owner. Number two, I get work. And number three, I make sure that the firm is running smoothly overall. That's the highest level. And above that, the best PMs obtain a principal level position because they're able to handle all the financial responsibilities in addition to business development, and then ultimately they will become principals. Okay? So it's kind of a question of, you may find that some people are on one level or another, experience, so forth and so on. But the highest level project manager is basically where principals are doing three things. They are managing the relationship with the owner, they're getting business, and they are managing the firm from an overall perspective. That's primarily what they're doing. And I don't know if you agree or don't agree, but that's kind of in a vacuum.
I don't have a disagreement with that. It's here there are various, each
And all
principal
principals
is
are
at a
involved.
different level.
Yeah. And in a firm of your size, principals are going to be involved in design conversations. Like sometimes you hear of like SOM, right? They get a project and they just give it to a project manager and then they never see the principal again. Well, and by the way, the project manager who was originally there on the project leaves after 3 months, and there's another one, and then they leave after another 3 months, there's another one, and they never see the principal until the end of the project. That's that culture. That's not the culture here, and that's not the culture to any of our clients. Most of our clients, they're involved. All principals are involved. They're involved. They want to be involved. And so ultimately, kind of looking at the scale, it may be worthwhile having a conversation. It may be worthwhile having some training for those that just became project managers as well. But project managers, they fall all over the spectrum. Okay. Any comments or questions? And if you want, what I can do is I can track down that article. It's kind of short, so you kind of get an idea. And you may say, well, really for what we do and the culture of our firm, these are the kind of things that we'd like to see our project managers do. On that list. And some of them you may say, well, no, we don't necessarily want them doing it. If they can do it, great. If not, that's okay. But the idea behind this is that everyone rises based upon the Peter Principle. Okay? Any questions, comments? Any general comments, questions? Any others? That was a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah. No one? Okay. Well, listen, thank you.